viruses because they go backwards in the central dogma of biology. The second way, and the much more common way that RNA viruses violate the central dogma, is by having a machine that allows them to make an RNA copy of their RNA information. And this is called an RNA replicase. Ultimately, even viruses end up with RNA in order to make the protein. They're going to use the cell's machinery to make that protein, but this is called the final common pathway because even viruses all have to do that. So what we see here is that viruses are essentially the exceptions that prove the rules of the central dogma of biology. So, and here are the two ways, just to summarize, that the viral exceptions to the central dogma. And because of that, we find that there's actually two more machines that can be found in certain groups of viruses. We can find an RNA template that's used to make a DNA copy in the retroviruses, and in things like the common cold, we have an RNA template that's used to make an RNA copy using a machine called RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. So here we have cellular machines, and here we have other machines that are found in viruses. So let me summarize the properties that we were talking about with regard to viruses. Viruses are extremely small. They're so small that they violate the cell doctrine that all living things are comprised of cells. Viruses have to go inside cells because they can't replicate unless they can use the machinery and the energy that's provided by cells. They have an extracellular phase when they're outside the cell, and they have an intracellular phase where they're making new virus particles. They have a single type of genetic information, either DNA or RNA, but unlike cells, they don't have both. They have one or the other. They have a protective protein coat, which is known as the capsid that we talked about. This is the when the bad news is wrapped in this protein, the capsid proteins. They can't metabolize energy, so they need the host. They can't make proteins, so they need the host. And they have no means of movement except being buffeted around by the environment or moved around by organismal processes. And in general, they put an emphasis on doing things in the most economical way possible. So, according to our three definitions of what constitutes a living thing, we found that viruses violate this first definition in that they are subcellular, they're not comprised of cells. We found that most vital properties that apply to all living things don't apply to viruses. And even in terms of possessing and processing biological information, we found that viruses are essentially the exceptions that prove the rule. So what we see is that viruses are kind of quasi-living pathogens at the border between the inanimate and the living. Now, I wrote a poem, and I'm going to take a verse out of the poem just to describe what we've talked about. And we could say that a virus has a structure giving it properties that lie between inanimate and truly living. Not quite cell, but more than gene. So today we've discussed a number of questions. We've talked about what is a virus. We've asked the question, are viruses alive? And in order to address that question, we had to pose several definitions of what constitutes a living thing. I hope these definitions resonated with some of you or all of you. In future lectures, we'll actually try to address a number of additional questions, such as how are viruses similar to living things? How are they different from living things? What do all viruses have in common? And what distinguishes one group of viruses from another? Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the lecture.